Hey everybody, I'm Jackson. Yeah, woo! It's no longer first thing in the morning, so there's no excuse for not being perky. So this is going to be a talk about building stuff for a lot of platforms. In my case, I'm talking about Facebook, because I work at Facebook and have worked on a bunch of different projects at Facebook. But I'm hoping the content here will be useful for you no matter what platforms you support, no matter which devices are your sort of chosen devices. This is a talk about not wasting effort, about being efficient, about building big things. So before we dive in, I just want to say thank you to everybody who's put this on. Like, this is a crazy well-organized conference. Like, this is such a good conference. I'm super excited to be here, so thank you to the organizers and everybody for letting me be here. Yeah. Nice. So who is this guy, right? Like, they let me come here, project on this gigantic, this is the biggest screen I've ever projected on in my entire life. It probably will be the biggest screen. This is my contact information. So I'm going to be around, but I'm probably not going to get a chance to talk to everybody. If you have questions, if you want to come work at Facebook, if you think the content of this talk was stupid and that you could have given a way better talk, if you have follow-up questions, just hit me up. Like, these are all of the ways that you can find me. Some more context on me, though. So I've been at Facebook a little over 4 years, which means I was there when we had 200-ish million users and like 1,200 employees, maybe 300 engineers. And I've watched us grow, what, 6x from then? It's been a pretty crazy ride. I've worked on the infrastructure team. I worked on the mobile team. I helped build Mobile Timeline. I helped work on groups, like Facebook groups, on the App Center. I've worked on the JavaScript frameworks that power our mobile site. I've worked on the product infrastructure that we use to run both the desktop and the mobile apps, the data analytics pipelines. I've worked on that stuff. And now I work in London. It's me and the Queen. So yeah, so a year and a half ago, I left the headquarters in Menlo Park to go work at the London office to help start the London engineering team. You know, July 16th of 2012, there were 4 of us, and now there's about 80. So we're growing quickly. She's a handsome lady. So in the London office, we happen to have an amazingly good Polish engineer named Sławek. Sławek is also fearless as it turns out. So I wanted to share with you guys something we did one day in the office. I don't know if you know the Hovding bicycle helmets. Is anybody here a cyclist? It's like, okay, we got some cyclists. You guys know the helmet. It's the inflating, it's like an airbag for your head helmet. So I bought one, and then Sławek was like, but how do you know it really works? It's like, I don't know, Sławek, like, test it? He's like, oh, we should do that. So we all piled money in and bought one. And if you'll forgive me, this is that. Wow. How do you feel? That's Sławek Biel. Whoops, I'm sneaking ahead. Polish engineer, brilliant. He's one of the best engineers I've ever worked with. But that was just a moment of amazing clowniness that I didn't know if it had made it back to Poland, so I thought I should bring it here. So let's get serious now. Let's talk about numbers. Numbers are serious. Does anybody know what number this is? Did somebody say bots on Facebook? Nice. Not quite. It is roughly users, but we don't count raw users because of bots and stuff. This is monthly active users. This is the number of people who are using Facebook every single month, like actually concretely doing real things with it. But it's kind of boring, right? Like we've announced this, we're like 0.19 over. It's not exciting anymore, but what about this number? Anybody?
Mobile.
Somebody's got it. Daily users. This is the number of people using Facebook services every single day. And I bring this up not to humble brag about how big we are and how awesome that is. That's not my goal. My goal is to impart how much there is at stake, how much we stand to lose if we don't do a good job of what we're doing. And that's like 2 United States, right? Like if you stack them on top of each other, that's that many people. And that's every single day. Yeah, so this is a really important one for this talk. This is the number of people using Facebook on mobile. Wow, somebody's way ahead of here. On mobile devices. And if you go back in time, if you sort of run back in history, this number was nothing like this time last year. It was like half or something, and half of that the year before. The number of people using Facebook through mobile devices is crazy. I mean, at a conference like this, that's probably understood. Everyone here probably knows that mobile is becoming the internet in a lot of ways. But it bears repeating. That's a big part of why I'm here talking about this today. This is the last sort of humble braggy thing I'll say. These are interesting numbers. I'll start from this side. My left, your right. 90,000, that's the number of employees at Microsoft. In the middle, 50,000 is the number of employees at Google-ish. And about 6,000, we're actually a little less than 6,000, is Facebook. So think about it, 1.2-ish billion people being supported by 6,000 people. I mean, do the math, right? Like that's a crazy number of people served per engineer, per designer, per marketing person, per whatever. We've got a lot of responsibility. We got to do this right. We can't afford to screw it all up because there aren't enough of us to pick up the slack. That's why I bring it up. So now let's get into the meat of it. Facebook used to be a website. Does anybody remember when Facebook was just a website? Yeah, me too. I was there, right? Like when I joined Facebook was about 2009. And back then, yeah, it was basically, there was some sort of iOS thing and there was like an Android thing, but it was basically a website. And actually, if you go back in time a little bit, it's more interesting than that. In 2006, phones got smart. BlackBerry released a browser that could do stuff. Like you could actually render pages on phones. It's crazy. And so a group of engineers, by that I mean 3 engineers, built Facebook's Facebook's first ever mobile website. I think it was m.facebook.com. The majority of the entire site was written by one engineer and was reviewed by one engineer. It's crazy when you think about it now. In 2007, something interesting happened. Apple came out with this phone. It's kind of a big deal. And we wrote an app for it. It's pretty awesome. Look at all the pictures on a phone from the internet. It's pretty cool. And in 2008, Google launched something important. And so we built an app for that too. Look at that, like Android 1.6 goodness up there. It's the glory days. No, not at all. So let's fast forward to today. Back then, when I started working on this stuff, there was a little mobile website that was maintained by basically nobody. There was this massive, massive website with hundreds of millions of users every day. There was this tiny iOS app that was literally maintained by one person. And there was this Android app that was like, it barely existed. So that's then, and you fast forward to now. Now we've got, 6 generations of iOS apps. We've got Android fragmented in every single possible way across every single possible device in every country of the world. We've got a website that's still massive. It still has hundreds of millions of users. We've got a mobile website that today is still bigger than all of our iOS and all of our Android users put together. Like the mobile web is still super important. But we also support tablets and Windows phones and Xboxes and PlayStations. Like it's becoming this multi-headed, crazy beast that we have to keep up and running. We have to keep this thing operating. Oh, and like almost 1 billion people are using these things. So it's not as if we just happen to have users that we happen to need to support. There's tons of people trying to use our services on all of these devices. We got to figure out a way to build our stuff so that we don't waste effort, right? Because if we have to do the same work for iOS as for Android, as for the Xbox, as for the mobile web, we're going to burn a ton of effort and get nothing for it. So the question is, how do we build for all of these contexts in a smart way? Anybody know? I can, no. It's complicated. The answer, of course, I was expecting more of a laugh. Are you guys that offended by PHP? I apologize for putting it on the screen if it offends you so. Of course, we do use PHP, and people love to hate PHP. I love to hate PHP. It is a great, you could say, sort of context-specific language, though. If you're building web-facing APIs, whether that's HTML, whether that's a JSON API, it's a pretty good toolkit to use for that. And especially the way we use it, we get the best of it, and we minimize the worst of it. So PHP matters a lot in making the everything, but that's not all there is. In fact, the most important parts of Facebook, the mission-critical, cannot-fail services that operate, that make Facebook available to your phone, to your everything, they're pretty much written in Java and C++. So if you think about Messenger, of course, on your iPhone is going to be Objective-C, and on your Android phone is going to be Java-based. But the service that you're connecting to, the back end, all of that is Java-based. So yeah, sure, we write PHP, that is true. But on top of that, like Newsfeed, when you get Newsfeed stories, the ranking system that you have gone through is written in C++. When it's really important, when it has to be fast, we write it as a service, and we connect to it through shared infrastructure. Oh, I already said this. We use Thrift. Anybody here building like system stuff? Oh, not so much. Oh, I should actually take stock. How many people here build iOS apps? Whoa. Okay. How many people here build Android apps? Oh, almost the same number. How many people here build web apps? Is everyone just raising their hand over and over again? And who here would consider themselves to be like a systems or a back-end engineer? Okay, so this isn't completely off base. I don't want to waste your...
You didn't ask about it.
Oh, yeah. Windows has a phone, right? I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. What I should say, big plug for Windows Phone. The new Internet Explorer, especially the developer tools, are ridiculous. Like, they're catching up so quickly. Like, IE 8 was like, well... But then the new stuff is like really, really good, really impressive. Like Microsoft's making big strides there, so props to that. And they have a phone too, what do you know? Sorry. Okay, back to the serious stuff. So Thrift. Thrift is a lightweight way to communicate cross-language, cross-service. Without Thrift, we couldn't exist. We couldn't support all of the devices that we support. The idea is like, say you've got a cool app, and it's all written in Objective-C, and maybe you've got some sort of lightweight backend for it. Well, when you want to add a new context to that, when you want to serve it up in a new way, let's say you want to serve it as an Android application. Let's say that you want to enable your Windows Phone application. You need a lightweight way to communicate with all of these things. One of the best ways to do it is to have a cross-language, sort of cross-service mechanism. Thrift is a great one for this. It was a project that started at Facebook, but it's now an Adobe project. There's a link at the end if you're curious. We also share data infrastructure. And this is something that maybe isn't obvious when you are first starting out. Like if you're building applications and you're like kind of getting a sense that like, oh, I need to collect analytics and I need to be able to do measurement and I need to know how things are going. It's not obvious straight away that, oh, you need to focus on building infrastructure for doing data analysis. It took us a while to get there too, but now it's mission critical. And in fact, all of our different devices all of our different contexts that we support. Every time we run an experiment with iOS, every time we release a new feature for Android and we're not sure if it's good or not, we're not sure if it's going to be successful or not, all of that comes back to a central data system. So Presto is a new project that we've released that is an SQL on top of Hadoop abstraction, and it's really fast. So doing queries across distributed data infrastructure is hard. SQL is easy. Boom, like you get wins there. And so we have. Hadoop is also another project that we've contributed to heavily. And HBase, we actually have some engineers who are working directly with the open source project as like most of their job. And HBase is becoming a more important part of our system every day. So the idea is, if I step back a second, the idea is data infrastructure matters a lot. But don't tie it too closely to any one environment. Don't make it all about the iOS app. Don't make it all about the web app. Try to think of it as, oh, this needs to be useful for data, and we can get data into it multiple ways. So I mentioned earlier, our mobile website has more users every day, I guess you could say, than our Android and our iOS apps together. There are more people using the browser on their phone. So it's important, it's got to be good. And what's cool about that is, as it turns out, building a desktop website and building a mobile website, they have a lot in common. It's a very similar sort of one environment to the other. So we share all of that. Like in the early days, the mobile website was kind of its own sort of side thing. Like Slee and the guys who built it were just like, well, we'll just kind of cut off this little corner of the universe and build the mobile website there. We've rotated, though. It's not like that anymore. And in fact, the mobile website has been able to iterate more quickly to the point where we're actually contributing back to our main desktop stack with innovations from the mobile web. Like, I don't know who was here at the hackathon yesterday. Oh, sweet. So I built an app using the React.js framework. That was a framework that was designed for mobile. And yet it's now the framework for Instagram.com. Like Instagram, like the whole thing, the website is built in React. I mean, so you can see this sort of shift from the desktop being the winner to the mobile web being the winner for innovation. And then you get things like JavaScript packaging, CSS minification, CSS namespacing. Like all of that comes through the same infrastructure shared between the desktop web and the mobile web. And structuring it that way, you get a lot of wins. It's sort of a pain because you have to think about a bigger code base. You have to think about more dependencies between environments, but at the same time, you don't waste work. And not wasting work, it turns out, is a very good way to get things done quickly. Photos. So this is Augie, who's one of the engineers in London. And Augie got jelloed yesterday. And by jelloed, I mean like 4 liters of Jello and his MacBook Pro in there. It wasn't actually a real MacBook Pro. It was a dead one that the director of the office sort of put in and put on his desk while he was away. Anyway, the reason I put this up here is because we're clowns. But more importantly, shared photo infrastructure is massively important. If you're building for a lot of different platforms, setting up your image resources, especially if you're a site like Facebook or anything where you're doing a lot of photo sharing, thinking about that early matters a lot. So for instance, when you upload a photo to Facebook, we do a bunch of sizes of it straight away and have them stored for all of the different environments, for iOS, for Android, for the desktop web, for Retina displays, all of this, so that whatever environment that it's later consumed on, we're already there. And I mean, our Haystack instances, I don't even know what the public numbers are today. Like 3 years ago, it was 21 petabytes of storage. And we were adding like 500 gigs a day or something, or a terabyte a day. I forget the numbers exactly, but at our scale, if you don't think about it as a problem unto itself, you're going to have a bad time because you're going to have to go back and either do resizing or batch jobs later. But if you think about it up front, if you think, oh, sometimes I need 2x images, sometimes I need 1.5x images for the mid-DPI Android screens. If you build for that initially, you save yourself a lot of time. And if you think about it as like, oh, this is the image infrastructure, this is a sharded out piece of what we do that's separate from how we build products, then you get to save yourself the trouble of trying to solve that problem in the products. So for instance, I mean, people here building for a lot of different environments. Have you hit that moment where you're like, oh man, I wish we could do this, but we don't have the right image resources? And you have to run the app for a while in a test mode where you've got like nasty pixelated images, or even release it to a limited set of environments because you don't have the right design resources. This is a problem that we think about from the beginning. And I think that's gotten us some pretty good wins. So I've been talking about technology a lot, but something that's also super important is like building products. And building products isn't really about technology at all. Like I think Mike's talk earlier covered this super well, that as much as it's about smart technology, it's about thinking about building stuff the right way and allocating your resources of people the right way. So in 2010, Facebook was basically an army of PHP engineers. Massive, 600 or something PHP engineers. I was on the mobile team then, and there were about 30 of us building the mobile website. And it had hundreds of millions of users even then, but we were just this tiny team. And the iOS app was even smaller, the iOS team was even smaller than that. And the Android team was even smaller than that. And we had this moment where oh, if we have 600 people building a website that has all of these features, and we're trying to build that entire thing in a mobile website, but we only have 30 people, maybe that's the wrong balance of people. I mean, it sounds obvious now looking back, but at the time it was a big shift for us. So if you fast forward today, we now have people for every skill set on every team. You know, the newsfeed team has iOS people and Android people. It's a problem that we're tackling from the product perspective first, not from the technology perspective. Because before we sharded on technology with people, and what we found was we're lacking. So you could say it's a people problem. This is from Onesie Wednesday. We're idiots. It's good fun, but it's a people problem. You have to think, how do I appropriately allocate people to this problem? And we solved it one way. It doesn't work for everybody. Everybody just learns all this stuff. I'm a mobile engineer in a lot of senses. I work in security now. I worked in infrastructure before that. And I've been through Android training, and I know enough Objective-C to fix bugs. And this is sort of how we approach it. There's no specialization really. You can choose to be specialized, but the world is open to you. So for instance, I'm on the security team. I just switched to it from the internal tools team. Whenever I joined this team, my friend Ben, who had been on security forever, brilliant engineer, he was like, this is cool, but I'm kind of bored of it. I'm going to go work on iOS. So he packed up his things and moved desks across the way, and now he's in the iOS team. There's no strict boundary there. If you're motivated, if you care, if you want to learn, there's no better way to do that than to jump in and start building it, especially if you're building it next to people who are awesome at it already. And this is how we do it. There's no requirement to be a certain class of engineer. You can just move around. Which, I mean, if you ask me, that flexibility has been what has helped us pivot and catch up on mobile. Because I don't know if you guys know, we got a lot of flames in the media maybe, 2 years ago for being behind the game in mobile. And I would say in a lot of senses we were. But we caught up by being flexible and letting people learn new platforms. So yeah, in a sense, everybody does everything. This is kind of a lie though, right? Nobody really does everything. But the idea is that every team, every product group, thinks about all sides of their product. They think about the different features of their product from all of the different environments. So, let's say I'm building Messenger. What features actually work on an iOS phone? What features does an Android phone need? What are the core experiences of the application? One team thinks about this. One team focuses on this. And they have people to do that work who are all in the same organization, talking to each other every day, sitting next to each other. It makes a huge difference in our ability to move quickly and to decide what does or doesn't work. So, talking a little bit about technology, there's different methodologies for releasing software. And I think Mike hit this perfectly. You're going to be disappointed. You're going to release things that you think are bad. You're going to remember, oh, it should have been so much better, which I think is totally true. I think companies that have to ship boxed software that you have to have on a CD-ROM or a DVD or a whatever, physical media, When you have to release software this way, it makes it harder. You have to think, okay, what is great software? What's the best thing this should be? Okay, and then how do we get there? Okay, and then are we there? Okay, now let's ship it. We don't really think about building things that way at Facebook. We think, could this be good? Maybe. Okay, let's build it. Let's ship it. And then let's decide if it's good. I mean, I guess startups often work this way. Startups have to work this way. You can't just have a sort of religious belief that your software is good. You have to prove that it's good. And we work pretty closely in line with that. And a big tool that helps us do this is a tool called Gatekeeper. There have been some talks about this online already. At Velocity Conference last year, we gave a big talk about Gatekeeper. But the idea is that we don't know what's going to be right for everybody. We don't know what's going to be the best experience possible. So we have a system that lets us experiment. And it's a really, really powerful system. It lets us say, okay, this feature we want to show to 1% of our users. So, like what, 10 million people or something. See how they use it. See how it changes their experience. See what metrics go up, see what metrics go down. Make a smart, informed decision based on that. So this tool was originally built for the web. It was a web tool. But as we've grown into the different environments, we're using it on iOS, we're using it on Android. It's now integrated into all of these different applications so that we can try out new versions of features that have existed for a while, or experimental versions of features that people haven't seen yet. And it turns out to be hugely important for getting it right and for moving quickly. I was talking with someone earlier. So I've worked on projects at companies where one team uses one source code system, one review tool, and one sort of task management tool. And in the same company, you walk down the hallway, and over here they're using something completely different. It's CVS here and SVN there, or it's Git here and Mercurial there. And it's a train wreck, because if you pick up and leave one team and move over, you're relearning everything. You're going back to like square one, which is painful. At Facebook, we don't do it this way. We use a tool called Fabricator, which was actually started at Facebook. It was written at Facebook by an engineer who then open sourced it and then left the company to work on his own open source project. He cares that much about it. And it's an amazingly good tool. And we use it across all of the teams. So if you were an iOS engineer and you want to go work on security, or if you were a tools engineer and you want to go work on product for the desktop web, most of your tools are exactly the same. Almost everything works exactly the same way. Like if you're picking up iOS, you're going to have to learn Xcode, which is its own beast. But most of the tools, most of the experience of being an engineer are identical. And so you don't have to relearn. The cost of context switching, the cost of learning all the platforms is lower because the platforms aren't that different. There's not Harrison for the Android app and GitHub for the iOS app. It's just Fabricator. One thing we learned really, really the hard way is don't bind your release cycles. So we were awesome at releasing a website every day. In fact, we release the website 2 times a day now. We've got more users and more engineers working on it, and more engineers committing day on day than we ever have. And we release twice as often. And we also have an iOS app that has about a 6-week release cycle. So every 6 weeks we roll out a new version. Everyone gets to download it and check out the update. And our Android application is about every 4 months. One mistake we made early on was to try to sort of lock these things together so that when we release a feature, it's ta-da to everyone. It was the wrong move. What makes sense for everybody, for the engineers, for the people using the site, is to release each thing as it's done. So let's say the Android team happens to have particularly motivated engineers who want to work on an experimental version of the navigation. We're going to release brand new navigation. I mean, this is hypothetical. I'm not saying we are. We probably are. I don't know. Anyway, they're going to release this. Well, if they can get it done faster than the iOS team, let them. Let them do it. When it's done, release it. Ship it to people. And watch what happens. Watch how people respond to it. And then before those next set of engineers go and build it for iOS or for the web, learn from the people who are already using it. Let each team, as they finish it, be an experimentation bed, be a measurement bed for all of the other teams. And what we find often is that the first team to finish something is like the alpha or the beta. I mean, I don't know, whatever, the sort of arbitrary distinctions. And then the next teams get to build a better version of it. because we don't bind release cycles. And it also means as an engineer, if I'm working on the desktop web, my stuff goes out every other day or every week. If I'm working on iOS, I know when the release cutoff is. I know when my feature will go out. I don't have to think, oh, what's the big long-term roadmap? Like, when is everything going to hit? Because that's a pain. It's a painful experience for me as an engineer. Also, building features asynchronously, I think we still struggle with this sometimes, actually. It's not even clear that a feature from one environment will make it to another environment. Like, it could be that we build it there, test it, and say, oh, you know what? This is almost the right idea. What it should be is this other thing that's not quite the same thing. So rather than deciding, oh, this feature should exist, engineers go and build it. We build it asynchronous. We let each group build their own stuff and see what happens and learn from that experience. And we don't tie them together as like a top-down, this is how it is. Another beauty of this is, so for instance, one of my good friends is a guy called Dan. Dan works on the privacy team, but he was really fascinated by our notifications. He was like, you know, these notifications, like, they work, right? Like, I get a little number, I click the number, like, that's good. But it was kind of boring. He was like, but see this photo? Like, I can see the tiny thumbnail of the photo, but I want to do more than that. So he and another engineer built an experimental version of the notifications that just replaced the entire thing. They built it for the desktop web in a hackathon. And I think the next week they were in a review with Zuck talking about why they did it, what the trade-offs are. And as far as I know, they released it to some % of users, and it may become the new notifications for everybody. But the beauty of that is, like, they decided, oh, the two of us are going to do this crazy thing that could change the experience for everybody. Let's go for it. And they did. And we can do this because there is no synchronous building of features. There's no lockstep rule about how we have to go about this. If you have a brilliant idea, you just go and build it in whatever environment you feel you can express yourself the best. So security. This is close to my heart because I'm a security engineer now. And I've been learning a lot. I've been on the security team now just for a few weeks, and there's so much to learn. It's like overwhelming. If there's anything I've learned, though, is like if you're not sharing security infrastructure, you're going to have a bad time. Like, you're going to have a bad time. The only way to do security right is to do it ubiquitously, or to do it everywhere, to do the same stuff everywhere. Because, for instance, as it turns out, spam is spam. You know, like a spam URL that takes you to a site that's going to try to phish you is the same on a desktop browser as it is in your mobile application. So if you don't share security infrastructure, you're going to leave people vulnerable. Or in the worst case, you're going to rebuild the same stuff in multiple environments. So this isn't how we've architected. We've architected it such that in every environment, we get the same protections. Before we render a story to your page, we know if it's safe or not. And that's true on the Android app, on the iOS app, on the mobile web. It's a shared infrastructure. Also, attackers, man, they're resourceful. If they want to own any given environment, they're going to poke and prod every single nook and cranny they can find. And if you don't integrate consistent systems across all of the contexts that you're exposed in, you're going to leave yourself vulnerable. Like, you're going to leave places where you're like, oh, whoops. And so we've been careful to integrate our security systems in every environment because we know we're going to be attacked in every environment. Don't have much more to say about that. For the web, one of the things that our PHP stack has that makes it super powerful and not as awful as PHP is on the daily basis is a thing called XHP. Anybody heard of XHP? Sweet, okay, so not nobody. XHP is a way to do XML markup in PHP. So you can say $ variable name equals, and then a block of XML. And that's valid, it's correct. And in fact, as soon as you've done that, on the very next line, that's an object that you can manipulate. You can append to children, you can manipulate with code. The power of this, it's hard to impart in one talk, because for building products, like if you're building for the web, it just saves you so much time because you can reuse components. You can say, oh, you know what? I've got an image with like some text next to it. I'm just going to make that a component of XML, image with a text next to it, or an image with text next to it, and use it over and over and over again. So you get wins in terms of not wasting time building the same UI over and over again. But for security, it also has a bunch of beautiful properties. For instance, you can't create invalid markup. It won't compile. So you win there. Because, I mean, who here builds the web is a lot of people. How often have you had a layout bug where you're like, I just can't figure out why the layout's not working the way I want? And you find out later it's because you have invalid markup. The browser is misparsing your page and giving you a page because it's trying to get it right but getting it wrong. Like, this happens a ton. XHP says this can't happen. It also means that you can never render unescaped content to a user as long as you're using XHP, because there's no way to get unescaped content into it. It either has to be XML markup to become markup, or it's escaped text to be displayed. Those are your options. So it's security by design. You don't waste time having to rethink every security assumption at every input. Okay, so almost done here. I'm going to leave time for questions, so let those percolate. I'm going to go over the big ideas, the things that I think are worthwhile to take from this. And it could be that they're all worthless. It could be that this has been a waste of your minutes. But I'm hoping these are the things that were valuable. And they are: separate your infrastructure from your products. This may be intuitively too abstract, or maybe it's something that you already know. If you're baking what I would call infrastructure into products, if you're baking data fetching, if you're baking caching, if you're baking security into the product code, you're likely to waste work whenever you build for the next thing. If you've got an iOS app, when you go and build your Android application, you're going to be starting all the way over. And that's painful. If you're building it just for the web, you're going to have to say, okay, crap, how do I get this into Objective-C now? So do your best to think about it as product, which is just the things you touch. It's just the Chrome, it's the buttons, it's the presentation layer, it's the client. Separate everything else out of that you possibly can so that the client is as thin and as dumb as it can possibly be. And that way you know that you're likely to waste the least amount of work, because the least amount of work is married to iOS or to Android Java or to HTML and CSS for the mobile web or to Windows Phone. Also, share where sharing makes you smarter. Like for us, we share in data. The data pipelines for logging the way features are being used, those are consistent across iOS, across Android, across the mobile web. We use the same frameworks. If you're doing really, really complex stuff, you're going to have a hard time there. So share where sharing makes you smarter, and try to waste as little of your time rebuilding things that have already been built by other people. This one is hard to bite off culturally if you're not there. And I think it took us, like, we totally struggled with this. And I think we do an okay job of it now. I wouldn't say we're perfect at this. But if you're building a product, own all the sides of it if you can. Own every aspect of it. Own the iOS app. Own the Android app. Own the HTML and the CSS that makes it a mobile web experience. Try to build all of that within your team, because every time you sort of pitch some amount of it off to somebody else, like let's say you're amazing at iOS and you're going to subcontract the Android application, you're going to lose so much context. You're going to lose so much tribal knowledge that you have about how this should go. And you're going to have to like coach and revise a ton, because you're giving away, you're losing information in that exchange. It's a lossy problem space. And we learned this because I used to work on the mobile web team where we were trying to recreate all of Facebook for desktop on mobile. And often, like, we just didn't know stuff. It's like, oh, you guys decided to do it this way because of this. Like, oh, that makes so much sense now. So if you can do everything as a team, like as the product team, if you can do the whole thing, you save yourself a ton of work. And it comes at the expense of having to know more environments. But the more stacks you know, the more effective I would say you can be as an engineer. So it's harder, but it's also really, really worthwhile. Yeah, so this is the stuff that I talked about. These slides are available on jacksongabbard.com/MCE. And with that, I'd like to open it up for questions. Oh, sorry, one more slide. We're a small team, but we make a big impact. Thank you. So questions. If you shout the question out, I will repeat it back and then do my best to answer it. Sorry, how do we manage to?
Dependent on the API, on the common business logic, on on the things that were outside of the strictly mobile web.
Got it. So I think I've got this. So the question is, well, the commentary is like, well, so we kind of iterate faster in the mobile web than we do in the desktop web. And that's sort of true. I would say that the mobile web is doing new things, and we're finding that the desktop web benefits from it. But the question is, like, how do we do that? Like, where's the business logic? How are we able to do this without wasting work? I'm trying to think, what's public? What can I talk about in a group this big? So for one, we tease out services. So the mobile web has to get messages and render them. The desktop web has to get messages and render them in the messages view. So we have a service, a Java-based service that provides that through Thrift to PHP. PHP provides endpoints that either turn into HTML and CSS and JavaScript or like JSON. But more importantly than that, within PHP itself, because both the desktop website and the mobile website, both of them are PHP at their heart, we put wrappers around everything that's important. So for instance, Facebook is a graph, right? Like fundamentally, it's a bunch of data stored in a bunch of MySQL databases with a massive caching layer, tau-based caching layer in the middle. Trying to write code that interacts with a graph is painful. So we write good abstractions that hide a lot of that tuck a lot of that away and mean that we basically just say, I want this data for this context. Can I please have it? And we have APIs in PHP that say, okay, cool, this user wants to see this photo. Great, that's all the product engineer has to know. This user, this photo, sweet. Behind the scenes, there are privacy checks that are happening. It's like, okay, this is the user, this is the photo, who owns that photo? What's the privacy policy for that photo? Can this user who wants it actually see it? And then that result comes back to the API that the product engineer is calling, which means the person who worries about privacy worries about privacy, and the person who's trying to build products just worries about building the products. If they don't get a photo back, they say, oops, you can't see this photo, and they show an error message. And that simplifies the problem. And we try to do this across every domain. Is that an answer, you think? Or okay, if not, grab me later. I can give you a more thorough answer. This hand was fast.
In the various layers, do you happen to use anything that could be fall into the category of API management? And
That's a good question. So the question was, we have all these layers of the stack, all the way from like super low-level distributed data up to, graceful APIs for building products. Anywhere along that chain, do we use something that's, you said API management? And I got to be honest, I don't even know what API management means. Like maybe we can talk about it later because I don't know what it means. Maybe we have something that does it, but by that name, I don't know it. Yeah.
How do you share all the features that you have between your teams? I mean, is it really possible that one team doesn't know about some features that Facebook have, and
Yeah, so the question is, how do we share features across teams? And is it possible that one team could just not even know about a feature that another team has? I can say this has definitely happened in the past. Whoops. What I think helps is that feature teams are now feature teams. They're not technology teams. It used to be a technology split, the iOS team, the mobile web team, the desktop web team. Now it's products. Now it's the people who build Messenger. It's the people who build Newsfeed. And the beauty of that is, like, who else would know it? It's got to be your team. It's your team's responsibility to know it. That said, it still happens. Like, there are still like crazy experiments, like my friends who are like rewriting notifications. That was just a crazy idea, Like they're just doing it rogue on their own on the desktop site. But if that becomes the thing, like let's say their hackathon project takes off, that will become the way it works, and that will be taken over by the team that owns that, which is a team that owns a lot of the sort of the navigation elements of the site. I forget the exact internal team name, but the notion is product teams own all of the features of a product. So, and they also own all of the environments of that product. So it should be in their domain. Does that answer? Sweet. Let me get the guy next to you.
do you still have some roles? For example, this one is an iOS person, this one is an Android person, this one is front end.
Gotcha. Yeah. So the question is, do we still have sort of specializations within teams? Like, is there still like the iOS person or the JavaScript person or the Android person? And the answer is yes. On any given team, there's definitely going to be the person who's responsible primarily for the Android application, the implementation of a feature. So let's say you're building events. You might be the Android events person, but you're not really an Android engineer. You're an events engineer. So you're beholden to a product more so than a technology stack. And it turns out in a lot of cases, we have engineers who review code across both environments. Like, I might be building the web version of something, and my primary code reviewer might be an iOS engineer, because that engineer may have really, really deep product knowledge. They might know exactly what the product experience should be. And so they're going to look at my HTML and my CSS and my PHP and my JavaScript and say, yep, you got it right, good job. Because there's a lot of flexibility across environments. So people do tend to have ownership of a given domain, but there's tons of crosstalk across domains. Right in the middle.
So gatekeeper, new features in iOS apps, hidden features, and Apple App Store review process. Is Apple aware of those hidden features when you submit the app with hidden?
Well, so we wouldn't call it hidden features. The answer, I mean, so I'm not super knowledgeable about this because I don't work that closely with Apple. I know that we work very closely with Apple. And I know that it's been tricky. Like, it hasn't been easy. We've had a lot of like, wouldn't it be cool if, except it's not going to happen, we have to do it a different way because the review process is such that it is, which is also a big part of why the iOS release cycle is 6 weeks rather than 4 weeks like it is for Android. So yeah, it's a burden. A burden's too strong. They're very careful to make sure that only good stuff comes through, and we work closely to make sure we only put good things through. But we've had to be very careful about exactly that point. Way in the back in the middle.
What do you think about increasing license network by using HTML5, the main cross-platform?
So the question was, what do I think about trying to decrease effort by building cross-platforms with HTML5? What I can say is I was actually on the team that tried to do this. I worked on a project called FaceWeb. It's clever. Facebook. Yeah, and what we tried to do, this was several years ago, well, 2.5 years ago. We're like, oh man, building for building for Android, building for iOS, like that's painful. All of these mobile devices have web views. Web views are the web. We're awesome at building for the web. Let's just do that. Duh. Intuitively, it seemed obvious, and there are a lot of companies that are doing this, right? Like there's like a app, what's it called? App something. There's PhoneGap. There's a bunch of Appcelerator, I think is it. Anyway, there's a bunch of companies that are trying to do this, and mobile devices are getting faster. The web views are getting better. The JavaScript engines are getting faster. What we found was that even if we did it the best we could possibly do it, we still couldn't get native equivalent performance. People still immediately were like, oh, this is a web view. Look how janky it scrolls. Look how the CSS doesn't load sometimes. Like, it's obvious. Even the Google Play Store, as far as I know, has had moments where, like, the CSS doesn't load. Or I know the iOS App Store has had this, where like I'm looking at my phone, like that's just HTML with no CSS. But this is like the App Store, like, lol. So we tried it. We grew like crazy during that period. It was super slow, it was super painful, but we gained ground in the world as a mobile application at the same time. So it's possible to not be horrible, but horrible is not the same as being good. And we shoot for being good. The other thing is, there's just a mismatch of expectations there, because browsers and HTML, like, it's easy to think, oh, well, I'll just release a new version, like, boom, it goes away. That's kind of like making someone re-download the application. And we used to do that a lot, like daily. And it was a bad experience. I think it's becoming more possible, but at the moment, I still have not seen anything. Like, there's a company called Famous, FAMO.US, that's trying to do really, really aggressive layouts and really crazy, like, sort of take over what the browser is trying to do because they're doing it wrong, stuff to make the mobile web fast and beautiful. But even them, as aggressive and as innovative as they are, like, you can still see the cracks. It just doesn't hold up. So it's a nice idea. I don't know. Maybe in the near future it will be possible again. But we're a long way from there. And Drew was giving a talk either now. Drew, you there? When's your talk? right after lunch, there's a talk that will cover some of this. Like it's covering it largely from the testing front, but Drew's got strong opinions here too. Any other questions? Do I have time still? No time? I'm done. No time. There's no time. So find me. I'll be here. I'll be the guy in the Facebook shirt. so thank you. Thank you.